Welcome to the Deep Dive. We have just pulled, well, the ultimate source stack for strategic thinking, a real trove of military history and grand strategy. But our goal today isn't to study war just for history's sake. Our mission is to pull out the wisdom that helps you win at life, whether you're navigating, a corporate environment, a political landscape, or just daily conflicts.
That's exactly right. Our source material starts with a pretty brutal premise, which is that life itself is an endless battle and conflict. The big difference is that the opponents we face, in business deals, in competitive fields, or even these subtle personal rivalries, they're rarely standing on a battlefield. They're often, as the sources say, slippery, evasive, and clever.
And the beauty of digging into this stuff is that the core principles of human conflict, they really haven't changed in 2,000 years. So the mission for this deep dive is to find those strategic shortcuts, those aha moments that can instantly lift your thinking above the day-to-day noise. We need to see the difference between the small skirmishes and the long-term campaign.
Yeah, we're basically distilling timeless wisdom. We are looking for the moves that let you anticipate where other people will be rigid, where they'll get emotional, and where their real center of power lies. This is all about arming you with a sense of detachment and foresight.
Okay, let's unpack this. And we have to start with the most critical battlefield of all, which is the space between your own ears. The foundational principle here is totally non-negotiable. Your mind is the starting point of all war and all strategy. If that's compromised, nothing else really matters.
Exactly. I mean, a mind that's easily swamped by stress or regret, or one that's too fixed on what worked yesterday, it's just never going to be able to adapt to what's happening right now. And this takes us right into the first big strategic idea the sources hit on, the guerrilla war of the mind strategy, the need to constantly do not fight the last war.
Right, we have this natural human tendency to lean on patterns, especially ones that have worked for us before. But that pattern recognition can be a huge weakness if it blinds you to a new kind of threat. So how do we consciously wage war against our own baggage?
The past, old successful methods, old traumas, even fixed expectations, it's all just ballast that weighs down the ship. You have to consciously force yourself to react only to what's in front of you now. The sources use this really powerful metaphor. Think of your mind as a fast-flowing river. A quick current responds immediately to the landscape, but these obsessional thoughts, preconceived notions about the market, or overconfidence from old winds, they're like boulders or mud that just cause stagnation.
Boulders and mud clogging the strategic flow. That's a fantastic image. It makes it so clear that we are our own primary obstacle. So if the rule is fluidity, how did the great strategist actually achieve it?
Well, they point to Napoleon. What made him a genius was his radical rejection of structure. When he was asked about the so-called principles of war, he famously said that he followed, well, none of them. He was the supreme opportunist. The second you start believing strategy is defined by these fixed, rigid laws, you just end up defending a static position, and reality will always, always surprise you.
So when we hit a completely new situation, the most strategic thing to do is just wipe the slate clean. Forget the playbook and let the new problem teach you what to do.
Yes, and that kind of fluidity requires deep emotional control. The sources really emphasize that fear is the most destructive emotion for achieving presence of mind. Fear makes us react to shadows in our imagination, not the facts on the ground.
General Patton, who was known for his really aggressive style, he seems to have had a unique way of dealing with that exact fear.
He did. He understood that fear thrives on the unknown. So Patton didn't try to suppress his fear, he confronted it deliberately. He would needlessly expose himself to danger on the front lines just to test his own reaction again and again. His strategy was familiarity. By repeatedly confronting your fears in these small, controlled ways, the anxiety gets less and less acute. He was building battle-tested confidence.
It's a very proactive approach then, actively managing your own psychology.
Mhm.
But there's another, maybe more reactive method the sources discuss, centered on that famous anecdote about the tea master facing a duel.
Oh, it's a stunning example of using ritual to harness focus. This tea master, he was not a swordsman at all. And yet he achieved this perfect state of composure just moments before the fight. While the expert swordsman was waiting, the master just performed his daily tea ceremony ritual with perfect concentration, methodically folding his coat, placing his fan, settling his posture.
So he used a simple, focused task to control his imagination. He wasn't thinking about the sword, he was completely absorbed in the act of making tea.
Exactly. And the fencing master who was watching realized the depth of that man's concentration. He was told, approach the duel as if you were serving tea to a guest. And that deliberate, calm dignity was so surprising and unnerving to his opponent that the duel was actually called off. The opponent realized he wasn't facing a man who was panicking, but a man completely anchored in the present.
The big takeaway for us, whether you're facing a tough presentation or a high-stakes negotiation, is that the composure you have when your mind is deeply absorbed in a problem, doesn't matter how mundane the task is, the composure is a strategic weapon against anxiety. If you feel panic rising, focus on the details of filing papers or arranging your desk until that nervous energy just transfers into focused physical action.
Okay, so let's move from the inner mind to the outer world. Let's clearly define strategy and tactics. Tactics are the skills for dealing with immediate day-to-day needs. It's the firefighting on the battlefield. This is where most people get tangled up in life's small, distracting conflicts.
It sounds like tactics are just the daily grind, the busyness that makes us feel productive but rarely moves the needle. How do we keep from getting sucked into that?
By understanding that strategy is the polar opposite. It's the art of elevating yourself above the immediate fight, commanding the entire campaign, and focusing relentlessly on the ultimate long-term goal. The sources point out that great strategists like Alexander the Great looked at the entire world dispassionately, and that gave him the detachment he needed to see the whole board, not just the square he was on.
Detachment is key. When you focus on that ultimate objective, the daily annoyances, they suddenly seem much smaller, easier to handle. And this focus on the long term brings us to the ripening for the sickle strategy, the art of patience and maneuver.
This is where you create the conditions for victory long before any confrontation even begins. It's about putting your opponents in positions of weakness before the battle starts, so that when the time comes, they're like ripe fruit that just falls with a gentle shake.
We have to talk about the duel between Miyamoto Musashi and Ganryu Sasaki. It is the perfect illustration of this kind of psychological maneuver.
Absolutely. Musashi won that famous duel, and it wasn't by using superior technique. He used delays, unconventional actions, and psychological games. He showed up hours late, said he slept in. He used a dirty towel as a headband and carved this ridiculously long wooden sword out of a boat oar on his way to the island.
He wasn't just late, he was infuriatingly disrespectful. He completely shattered Ganryu's composure before a single sword was drawn.
And Ganryu was haughty. He relied entirely on his reputation and his rigid training. Musashi's bizarre behavior just instantly unhinged him. The final straw was this enigmatic remark Musashi made when Ganryu threw his sword sheath into the ocean. He just said, "What victor on earth would abandon his sheath to the sea?" That one sentence enraged Ganryu, forced him to rush in, and he was defeated instantly.
So the lesson isn't to be late to meetings. It's to understand that by introducing calculated uncertainty and some unconventional behavior, you could force your opponent to abandon their prepared script. And they fall back on impulse and, well, they make mistakes.
Exactly. That maneuver set the stage. But sometimes the greatest maneuver is one of non-action, the strategic retreat.
Retreat is always seen as failure, yet the sources here treat it as a sign of strategic strength. How do we shift that perspective?
Retreating is only weakness if it's done out of panic. A strategic retreat is a deliberate trade. You're trading space for time. By refusing to engage a stronger aggressor, you buy yourself invaluable time to think, to recover, to gather allies, and to gain a better perspective on the whole situation.
And the ultimate example of this has to be Mao Zedong's famous Long March.
Right. It's often taught as just a simple flight, but it was used as a positive strategy. The goal wasn't just survival, it was gaining time to expose the enemy's flaws while simultaneously strengthening his own base. He forged a new, unified identity among his followers through that shared hardship. He traded geographical territory for psychological and political cohesion.
And Napoleon summed this up perfectly. Space I can recover, time never. So when we face overwhelming pressure in life, giving ground, whether it's stepping away from a toxic conversation or delaying a big investment, that's how you buy time, the ultimate strategic resource.
And on the other hand, if the time is right, speed has to be overwhelming. If you must act, the sources push for the blitzkrieg strategy. In a world full of analysis paralysis and indecisive people, speed is power. Striking first, before your opponents can get their defenses up, ensures they're emotional, unbalanced, and prone to making mistakes.
This requires a ton of preparation, though. It's not just mindless rushing, which I think is often mistaken for action.
No, it's Genghis Khan's slow, slow, quick, quick model. The first slow is meticulous, patient preparation and intelligence gathering. The second slow is the setup lulling the enemy into a false sense of security, masking your true intent.
Then you hit them with the two quicks.
Yes. A swift frontal attack to fix their attention, followed immediately by an overwhelming blow from an unexpected direction. The goal is total panic, psychological imbalance. You save your carefulness for the prep phase, but once the starting gun fires, you empty your mind of doubts and you act with total, unhesitating force.
Whether we're moving slow or fast, every action has to be informed by good intelligence. The sources state that the goal of strategy should be less the army you face and more the mind of the person who runs it. It's a psychological target.
And this advanced knowledge, it must come from people who know the enemy's situation. This isn't just about spies, it's about being a superior reader of human nature, honed through just relentless personal observation. You have to apply a ruthless standard of judgment.
Which is, judge people by their actions, not by what they say their intentions are.
Exactly. The sources remind us, what people say about themselves does not matter. People will say anything. Look at what they have done. Deeds do not lie. It's incredibly hard to ignore people's self-congratulatory words, but their actual track record is the only honest measure of character and capability.
And once you truly know your enemy, their habits, their fears, their past deeds, you have to identify their critical vulnerability, their center of gravity, this single pillar that their entire power structure stands on.
Yeah, you don't focus on punching the fist, you focus on taking out the legs. Military power is rarely just in the army itself, it's in the support systems. The money, the supplies, the allies, their reputation, public goodwill.
This concept is so brilliantly illustrated by Scipio Africanus, who defeated Hannibal, arguably the greatest general of antiquity, but he didn't do it by engaging his invincible army in Italy.
Scipio executed a perfect strategic pivot. Hannibal was untouchable in Italy, so Scipio just looked right past the immediate threat. He realized Hannibal's strength depended entirely on Carthage, and Carthage's strength depended on its vast material prosperity, its economic base. So Scipio ignored the punch and attacked the legs, the support system, first in Spain, effectively choking Carthage's purse strings.
By attacking the foundation, he forced Hannibal to retreat to defend his economic structure. The army wasn't the center of gravity. The trade routes and the treasury were.
That's the powerful takeaway for us. If you're battling a toxic situation at work, the center of gravity might not be the difficult person or the immediate conflict. It might be the lack of financial accountability that enables their behavior, or maybe a poorly designed internal process that allows the toxicity to thrive. You attack the system supporting the enemy, not the enemy directly.
That is so much more strategic, and ultimately a lot less taxing. Okay, finally, let's talk about organizational warfare, how to unify your own side. Sometimes the best strategy for internal cohesion is to proactively find an external enemy.
Leaders have always found it useful to have an enemy at the gates to rally their troops. When people get too comfortable, they turn their aggression inward, give them a clear enemy, and they forget all their internal squabbles. Margaret Thatcher was an absolute master of this polarization tactic.
Right. She came to power as an outsider, and instead of becoming this unifying insider, she actively marked out these clear opponents, the socialists, the unions, the Argentinians, to keep herself defined as a righteous fighter.
It created this incredibly powerful, unwavering identity for her and for her base. By actively forcing a rift, by making it crystal clear what she was fighting against, she created a fiercely loyal support base who saw her as the only uncompromising option.
She wasn't tempted by the need for universal popularity. Her view was simple. Let some of the public hate you. You cannot please everyone. By driving some people away, she created a clearly defined space for battle and unified her core followers around a cause. Without antagonism, there is no battle. And without a battle, there's often no real push for collective victory. This deep dive has covered a ton of ground, but the common thread is always control, clarity, and the long-term view. The necessity of internal clarity through the guerrilla war of the mind, the detachment of grand strategy, the effective maneuvers of, ripening and the blitzkrieg, and the ultimate structural move of hitting the enemy's center of gravity.
And all of this strategic wisdom, from Sun Tzu to Napoleon, it all relies on one critical ingredient we haven't fully stressed yet: necessity. People only change their behavior if they absolutely have to. The ancient strategists spoke of the death ground, a position where an army has no way to retreat and is forced to fight desperately.
That is the famous example of Cortés in Mexico. When he landed, He ordered his men to burn their ships. He completely eliminated the safety net. There was no plan B. No comfortable retreat waiting in the harbor. They had to conquer, or they would perish.
Freedom, paradoxically, can be a burden. It offers too many options, and that leads to timidity and hesitation. When you are forced to face finality, the success or ruin of the whole endeavor, your perspective changes completely.
Dostoevsky realized this after he experienced a simulated death sentence. He said that after facing his own end, his life would suddenly seem endless, a whole eternity, each minute a century, because he would no longer waste a single second. The removal of the option to procrastinate or fail forces absolute presence of mind.
So here's the final provocation for you to mull over as you transition back into the daily grind. In modern life, we almost always maintain these mental safety nets. The comfortable job we can fall back on, the savings account, the idea that we have limitless time stretching out ahead of us, we keep that mental ship waiting in the harbor, just in case.
What would happen to your actions, your intensity, and your focus if you truly ran your ships aground, burned them, and left yourself just one terrifying option: succeed or go down? That sense of total urgency, that sense of necessity, is what makes all actions more certain, more forceful, and ultimately more strategic.